Hello, and welcome to Emerging Form. I'm Christy Ashwanden.
And I'm Rosemary Watola Tromer, and this is a show on creative process. Hey, Christy.
Hey, Rosemary, how's it going?
Things are good. For me, I know you have been really busy with putting together this conference.
Yeah, I'm so excited. It's going to be our second annual Grand Mesa Writers Symposium. Fun little event, gathering a convergence of writers in my tiny little fun town of Cedar Edge, Colorado. And you know what I'm most excited about, Rosemary?
Do tell.
Oh, come on, It's that you're gonna be there.
I get to join. I get to
Can I
join on
can
the
I tell the
last
story of
day.
last year when you said, "Oh, yeah, I'll be a headliner?"
Go ahead. Go
You
ahead,
double
Christy.
booked yourself. I just could not believe it because you are so much more organized than me. I like that Rosemary could make such a mistake. It was hilarious and unexpected.
And horrifying. It was absolutely horrifying, is what it was. Thank goodness for friends who forgive you when
Of
you
course,
overbook yourself.
I will always forgive you. Well, I'm really
I have
excited
a
about it
question for you.
too. Okay,
Can I ask you a question?
sure.
Why do you think it's important? Why does it matter to have a regional writers conference? What
Oh, this is a great question. For me, why am I participating in this? Why am I, donating my time to it? It's because well, Rosemary, you know me. I'm all about community, and this
Mhm.
event is really about creating community for writers in Western Colorado. We're
Mhm.
really trying to build and establish a welcoming community for
Yeah.
writers and for readers. I think that this event is not just for people who are writing, but also people who are readers and want to come together and meet writers. And, I think book people and words people are of a certain type, right?
Right. And let's face it, it's a solitary act. Writing is a solitary act. It's all about butt in chair alone most of the time.
Right.
So I do think that when we get together and experience, you know, other people who are doing that same thing, how
Yeah.
exciting that is to find the other people who are alone, in their work, and what is working for you? Oh, you feel that
Yeah.
too, and that kind of
Yeah.
community and camaraderie, and even and I think especially inspiration.
Oh, for sure. But, I have had for many, many years, I mean, well over probably 15 years or something, I had started off hosting these writing gatherings at my farm and they kind of grew into these other workshops. And now I've been doing a whole variety of them. Right now I have a book proposal workshop going on. But honestly, this all started because I was lonely. I'd moved out to this, I'd never
Right.
lived in a rural place before. Here I am in rural Western Colorado. And I thought, oh my God, where are my people? Coming from Boulder, where
Yeah.
I had this really large writing community. But you know what? I found very quickly that it was possible. And it turned out that there were some really amazing writers here that I could really bond with. And so, I think sometimes the answer is, if you're looking for a community or you're looking for a friend or you're looking for an opportunity, sometimes that just means you need to be the one to create it. And I feel like that's kind of what we're doing here.
Yeah. And you're great at it. Let's be
Oh, thank
honest. Like,
you.
you're really good at being a community creator. So I'm excited that you've created this new program for us.
Oh, yeah. I'm excited about it. And I'm just so excited that you'll be participating, Rosemary. And, I'm thrilled. We're trying something new this year. We're going to have a closing plenary, sort of a closing highlight act. And that's going to be you. And actually, it'll be you and me talking about some of the things we talk about a lot on this show, which is about how to build a creative practice. So, really excited about that. So
Well,
I know
it's
you're
time.
excited, as I am, for this week's guest. Do you want to introduce her?
I will. I am so excited to have GG Renee Hill here. She is an author, a creative coach, and workshop facilitator whose work centers writing as a tool for healing, self discovery, and creative expression. Her mission is to help others enrich their lives and communities through the transformative power of the written word. She's the author of Self-Care Check-In, a guided journal to build healthy habits and devote time to you, and A Year of Self-Reflection journal, 365 days of guided prompts to slow down, tune in, and grow. And her most recent book, just out, Storywork, Field Notes on Self-Discovery and Reclaiming Your Narrative. When she's not writing, Gigi facilitates writing workshops for a diverse list of corporate and nonprofit clients and literary organizations. Let's bring her on.
Welcome to Emerging Forum, Gigi.
Well, thank you for having me here. I'm excited.
Oh, I've been looking forward to this for months, so I'm especially grateful it's today. So let's start, I think, with a bit of your story, because it's not everybody's story. How did you come to writing?
Well, I came to writing, fortunately, through therapy. I wrote as a little girl, like many of us do, in a little diary with a little lock on it, but it wasn't a means of anything serious or a career or a means of healing or anything like that. So I got away from it and did not return to writing until I went to therapy in my late 20s. And that was a time in my life where I was feeling really lost and disconnected from myself. And the therapist in that very first session said, it sounds like writing has always been a place where you feel sure of yourself, comfortable, confident in your ability to express yourself. Why don't you return to that as a way to sort of peel back the layers and figure out what's going on beneath the surface? And as soon as she said the words, I was like, duh, yeah. Like, why don't I? Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm just always thankful to her for just pointing. Sometimes you just need somebody to show you the obvious. And she did that for me. And I haven't stopped since.
So it really started as kind of a method of healing for you. I love that. That's really powerful. And in your new book, Storywork, you write from this really interesting and profound premise that you can change your life by rewriting your story. Can you just tell us a little bit about that idea and about the book?
Yes, I had this narrative that I discovered through my journaling and just my journal being a place where I could be raw and honest with myself in a way that I hadn't been for years, if not ever. And I noticed this narrative through everything I was expressing, my feelings, my perspectives on things that were happening in my life. It was this struggle narrative. It was this victim narrative. Everything was happening to me. I couldn't do anything about it. I was just sad. I was almost, I call it my sad girl era. It was like this persona, like it was just my identity. Then I just kind of embraced it. And I wanted to change that. I wanted to imagine, well, what if I looked at life differently? And so as I was coming to this realization that I had this narrative, I was also reading a lot about healing and personal growth and spiritual growth. And the concept of the fact that we all tell ourselves stories to live, and we tell ourselves stories that dictate how we show up was eye-opening to me. And I recognized it in myself that I'm telling myself this story, that I'm damaged and that I'm broken and that I'm sad and I'll always be. And so over time, I worked on Storywork, the beginnings of it, for probably like years before I really started conceptualizing the book. I realized that I was changing that narrative for myself. And I wanted to, through writing, help others recognize the stories they were telling themselves. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And you start to recognize it everywhere, right? In your friends, in your family, and people, oh, you're telling yourself a story. Right? And so I wanted to use my interest and my passion and my gift for writing and language to help others recognize what stories they were telling themselves and how that story is grounded in our beliefs and our experiences and things we've picked up from the world and also from our own defense mechanisms, like how that was shaping our life experience. And I wanted to write a book about that.
And you do a great job of that too, by the way. I feel like part of the thrill of reading your book is that you are so open with your own story and your own capacity to see through your stories that you've been telling. So I feel like it's an inspiration, right? Your writing is an inspiration is in terms of how do you make it seem possible, not just for you, but for anyone. I kind of want to go back to something though. Your therapist said to you, writing feels like a place where you're confident. Do you think this is something that's going to work for people who don't feel super confident about their writing abilities to start?
I love that question. I think that from my experience as a coach and facilitator, that part of what I build into the work itself is finding your way to a place where you can be comfortable being honest with yourself. So many of us do have this wall where writing is a place where we judge ourselves if we're not saying it perfectly, or we're worried about our spelling and our punctuation. So
Yeah.
part of the foundational work that I do in my workshops, and I don't think I got really into it too much in the book. In the book, I just more so say, let this be a place where you're not judging yourself, where you're just open with yourself.
Yeah.
But I really go into that in my workshops, that this is not you're not in English class where your teacher's going to like redline all the
Yeah.
errors. This is a place to just literally externalize what's going on in your mind. And I share that often in my journal. I don't use punctuation. I don't write. I'm not writing to impress myself or to be clever or poetic. I'm just writing to externalize what's going on in my head. So anyone who's listening who says, well, I'm not a writer, it's just a way to see what's going on in your mind, right? Because often there's so much power in even that. Because when I
Yeah.
see some of the things I'm thinking, I'm like, am I really saying that to myself? I would never say that to a friend of mine or someone I
Mhm.
love. So why am I saying this to myself? Do I really believe that? So recognize that it's just a tool. It's not a
Mhm.
place where you have to be this thing, this great writer or
Mhm.
anything like that. That's why I really wanted story work to be for people who might use the work to develop ideas for their writing if they're writers. But
Mhm.
Mhm.
essentially it's for anyone who can use words, can use story work to get a better handle on what's going on in their minds and how they might question some of the stories and beliefs that they're carrying.
Yeah, this reminds me so much of this exercise that Rosemary taught me, and I know we've talked about it on the show before, but this thing of saying, is this true? And really reversing something. So you hold this belief and say, well, what if the opposite is true? And it's kind of surprising how often it turns out actually, the opposite can be true too. And sometimes this is because you've hit upon a paradox. Sometimes different things can be true at once. But sometimes it's just a way of showing us that we're holding on to incorrect beliefs that are not correct or no longer correct, right?
Mhm.
Which actually
Absolutely.
makes me think a little bit about you actually go into that and out of Byron Katie's work also, right? What else is true?
Mm.
Um,
Yes.
are you sure it's true? Are you 100% it's true? How do we turn it around? Um,
Right.
and you talk a lot about limiting beliefs.
Mhm.
And this is one of the ways we can get at that. But one of the things you say is we should question any story or inner narrative that leaves no room for hope, right? Like, I'm a victim. End of story, right?
Mhm.
But that got me thinking, what
Yeah.
do you think is the role of hope in a
Mhm.
creative practice?
It's everything. I had this note up on my wall for years that said, hope, something like hope is a product of being creative, or hope is a byproduct of being creative. I don't know. It was just like one of those downloads that came to me, and I really wanted
Uh-huh.
to center that and remember that to be hopeful, you have to be able to think about different possibilities, right? You have
Mhm.
to believe that what your efforts or your what you're creating, what you're doing, that there's some possibility that it's going to lead to a greater good.
Mhm.
So in order to even pick up a pen or pick up a paintbrush or anything that we create in our lives, even just, day to day making a meal, you have to hope that that meal is going to nourish you, it's going to keep you alive,
Yeah.
right? Hope is just built into the human experience. If we lose that, it's like what is the motivation for anything, right? When we know that
Mhm.
there's always the fear, there's always possibility that things could go wrong, that darkness will overtake the light, which, I associate light with hope and
Mhm.
and possibility, and just having faith that something good can still come from even a tragic situation or something that you can't control. So when I think about my creative practice, there's so much hope in it. There's this belief that I can't see a way out of this, right? Whether
Mhm.
it's a mood that I'm in or a situation that I'm
Uh-huh.
in, but through my practice, right? The things that ground me and that align me with my values, there's hope that something will shift, that I
Mhm.
can have some co creative contribution to things and that I can shift my energy. And I don't know, I feel like, don't you feel a shift in your energy when you choose like a hopeful
Yeah.
perspective, right? When you see some hope, there's like a shift inside. And even
Yeah.
that, I think it was Marianne Williamson who said like a miracle is a shift in perspective. So I
Mhm.
feel like even that we can create everyday miracles just by choosing to do the creative thing, plant the seed and just hope that something positive comes from it.
Yeah, and some of this is kind of a leaning into uncertainty, right? You talk about
Yeah.
possibility, and I think
Yeah.
so often when we're in a difficult times or uncertain times, which let's be honest, every time is uncertain, but that can be really scary. And so it's how do we look at this? Is this scary or is it a sense of possibility that we can bring to this moment? And I see you bringing that possibility and that shift of perspective of looking at those things as an opportunity rather than something to be fearful about.
Yes.
But I want to ask
Yes.
about something you write about in the book. You make this distinction between self discovery prompts and storytelling prompts. Can you talk about that a little bit? What's the distinction there?
I noticed a big shift in my self discovery and just growth journey when once I started going to therapy and just using writing as a tool for my development. I noticed that I was really able to peel back the layers of what I had been living from insofar as like the
Hmm.
image that I wanted to have and the masks that we all wear. And I was just noticing through journaling my feelings and thoughts that there were these questions that were coming up, right? Just like
Hmm.
asking myself, like, well, what's the pattern here? What am I noticing? What lesson can I learn from this? And those kind of prompts can really be generative. But there was a deeper layer when I started asking myself, what's an example or situation from my life that illustrates this? And have I ever actually told myself that story? And so it's this marriage of the part of me that is interested in like the human behavior and the psychology and the understanding of what's going on and just noticing it and observing it and the mindfulness of it all. And then this part of me that's like, the always loved stories, right? Always loved, I grew up reading fiction, mostly fiction,
Hmm.
movies, how storytelling captures human behavior in this creative way. So that literary craft part of me that's interested in that, and that part of me that's interested in human behavior is like bringing that together and saying, I understand this or I'm looking at this from the psychology part aspect of it, but what if I look at it from like the creative side? How would I tell myself this story? And what could I learn from it by manipulating it in that way? Like, how might that help me look at it differently? How might that help me recreate this or alchemize this thing? And I'm sure that all of this did not just come from within. I think that's part of it, but I think it's a marriage of the fact that while I'm doing my practice of, I've during the time I'm writing the book, I'm coaching, I'm working with clients, and I'm also consuming a lot of art. So as you're
Hmm.
doing that, like whether it's
Yeah.
through films and um, listening to other artists talk about their practice and their creativity, I'm really interested. Like when I watch a movie that I like, I go into who wrote it, right? Who's the
Yeah.
director? What was the creative
Hmm.
process to bring this together? And I noticed that when I started telling myself my stories, things that I had talked about but never had actually written in story form, there were new things to discover. And I was like,
Uh-huh.
wow, this is really healing to just tell this story in a creative way, even sometimes to fictionalize it or imagine it differently. And you discover new emotional truths. And just what we were talking about, like, what else could be true? you can use creative devices to imagine what else could be true. And you can tap back into that creativity that sometimes we kind of let go of as children. And we're just think like,
Yeah.
well, what's actually possible and factual and
Mhm.
rational? And so
Mhm.
creatively looking at how I could tell these stories. So that became part of like my signature approach. And that's where story work
Mhm.
came from. And I was using it with clients and I was using it in workshops. And I just saw the power of marrying those things, not just looking at it realistically of like, what am I telling myself? What are my patterns? But also like, what
Mhm.
examples from my life illustrate this? And how can I tell those stories in a creative way?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I liked too how you mentioned in the book, you can start not just with the whole story, but what if you start just with an object, right? You start with
Mhm.
the blue cup, and then how does the narrative build around the, oh yeah, I remember the last time I used that blue cup, and I used it before when this awful thing happened, and then this, and now
Yeah.
all of a sudden the blue cup becomes the object itself,
Mm-hmm.
becomes the
Mm-hmm.
what invites the rest of that story to come in, where you didn't even know that you
Yes.
had that story buried in there for a while.
Exactly. Yeah. There's like an entry point. It's a different entry point that you might not have considered.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
loved that.
absolutely. I really want to ask you about something that's kind of at the heart of your work, but I also think it sort of lies at the heart of so much of the best art and writing that comes into the world, and that is vulnerability. Why is it so important to make yourself vulnerable in these circumstances, and how does vulnerability play into writing and sort of drive it?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's everything. I noticed that that's what I was so drawn to. And, I grew up with my mother really exposing me to the arts, going to plays, going to shows. And I was just always so fascinated with the performers and how they just commit and just leave it all out there. And they're just like, they have no self consciousness and no shame. And in artists in general, I recognize that early on as that if that's not there, it's just not as compelling. It's not
Yeah,
as enchanting. And I sensed inside myself that I had that, but so often it had been shut down when it's not received well, or or you're punished or you're teased or rejected in some way. So we hide that part of ourselves. But when I went to therapy and she gave me that permission to start writing, it just opened something up for me. I was like, well, what if this part of me is not something that's if I value this in other people, why do I not value this in myself? And I did have intimate relationships where people told me that my vulnerability was something that made them feel more comfortable to open up and to be true to themselves. So I started recognizing that. And so the thing was is that I needed to gradually build confidence in it. I recognized it started recognizing it as a strength in therapy, being able to tell my story, say things out loud that I had never said, even to my close friends who love me unconditionally,
wow,
and my sister.
wow,
But in therapy, being able to say these things and have it received and held, and her
hmm
say, "I see
yeah,
you. I know that must have been hard." That, but someone who doesn't love me or know me, right? Like someone
yeah,
who's like, and I was like, wow, like, it was a corrective experience. It was like, okay, so in the right spaces, I can be open like this and it can be safe and it can actually strengthen me. I felt stronger coming out of that. And I thought through my writing, I feel that way. When I put these things on the page, I feel empowered by it. I feel like I'm like, it's diminishing the shame that I felt. So I started to gradually broaden that circle. First, it was just therapy and my close loved ones. And then it was, I'm going to write a little bit on, I think it was like Facebook was my first, like, I'm going to share a little something in
uh-huh,
writing. And
yeah,
that didn't last very long. Very soon after, one of my friends was like, you should start a blog, right? I see
uh-huh,
something happening. You
yeah,
should start a blog. So I started blogging and just that empowerment grew. But what I always say to people in my workshops, and I don't know if I said this explicitly in the book, but something I picked up from Brene Brown was that vulnerability there's discernment that has to come with vulnerability, right? That's very important. And she says, only share when you have no unmet needs that you're trying to fill. And that has been a guideline for me. If I'm still not ready to share something, or if someone's listening and they're like, does this mean I just go out and tell everybody all the things I'm ashamed of and so it'll free me of
no,
that? No, it does
yeah,
not mean that. But
yeah,
find a safe person. Maybe start with your therapist or your
Mhm.
pastor or loved one, anyone that you feel safe with, start with yourself. Sometimes we have to start with
Mhm.
ourselves because there's so many things we haven't
Yeah.
admitted to ourselves. Start very small. And then for me, it was, that small circle. It brought it into like a little creative community that I was building and finding
Mhm.
those safe places. And I made errors along the way and shared in spaces I thought were safe and that weren't. But instead of that shutting me down, I was like, that's just information that helps me to make my radar a little bit better. But vulnerability is the key to my creativity because I just feel that it's something that comes naturally to me that for so long I thought was a burden or like a weakness. And by transforming that through that thinking that we've talked about, how else can I look at this? It's become something that I feel really empowered by and that has helped me to deal with the shame that I carried for such a long time.
Yeah, I really like what you said about being truthful with yourself too and being vulnerable
Mhm.
with yourself because so
Mhm.
often that's where it starts, right? And
Yeah.
particularly I see this sometimes when I'm leading writing workshops and things with memoirs that people
Mhm.
are sort of not, we're trying to hide these truths, and the things that make that writing good is being truthful and being vulnerable. And sometimes it's the things that we don't like about ourselves, but keeping them hidden doesn't serve us.
Exactly. Yeah, I can relate to that big time. I hid so
Mhm.
many things from myself, avoided my own
Mhm.
truths because I just didn't know any better. And many of us
Mhm.
don't. We feel safer.
Sure.
But yeah, we
Of
have to start
course.
with ourselves.
Uh-huh,
Yeah.
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 Well, and that brings me to you talk about the why. And part
Mhm.
the why, I think, is part of how we come to decide it is that moment when we're like, oh yeah, it's important to share this story even though it is vulnerable. So
Mhm.
maybe this is, I guess, two parts. First is, tell us about the why. How do you know your why? And second, I guess I'm curious about how the why is shaping your own practice.
Sure. I think that most people can get closer to their why by thinking about what their values are. And
Mhm.
it's important to think about it's not something that like unless you're in the midst of doing this work yourself, like often our first thought of values is kind of maybe values that were given to us or that we think we
Mhm.
should
Yeah.
have, right, from our families or culture or religion. And so I would first say, what are your values? Like what makes life really meaningful and fulfilling to you? What inspires you to action? What are your personal values? And so for me, it was expression, it was authenticity. And I realized that for me to align with those values, that I needed to make some changes, that I wasn't in alignment with all of my values. And that was a key area that I think was making me feel disconnected from myself. I was silencing my truths. I was not believing in my worth. And all of these ways I was out of alignment with what I truly value. And another
Mhm.
thing for writing the book and just finding the courage to be so honest was I discovered along the way that one of my values is, well, one of my values is expression, but one of my values was that I wanted to be in alignment with that value of expression. I needed to break these silences, right? And I needed to break some of these um, generational patterns of silence and how my family and more broadly my culture treated talking about mental health.
Mhm.
So, in order to break that, to be in alignment with my value of expression and authenticity, I needed to break that and I needed to set an example for my kids. And I realized that by being out of alignment, and I was often subconsciously like we're perpetuating things that we don't even believe for ourselves, like
Mhm.
hiding my mental health struggles and not getting the help I needed, for example. I was like, I'm
Uh-huh.
doing the same thing like my
Wow.
family did.
Yeah.
So that became such a driving force for my vulnerability. Like it's uncomfortable. I
Mhm.
don't know what my extended family will think, but I'm looking at my little ones and wanting to set an example for them. So that gave me the courage to
Yeah.
be vulnerable. Like there's a purpose to it. So think about what your values are and
Mhm.
let that drive your actions, even if you have to
Mhm.
go against some things that might, ruffle some feathers. It gives you
Yeah.
courage because you know that it's meaningful for a reason.
Mhm. Oh, that's so important, and it's really sometimes it's about breaking patterns that we've grown up with and learned through, being immersed. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're just about out of time. I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show to talk with us.
Thank you for having me. I love, that this podcast is about the creative process because I
Yeah.
too am obsessed with the creative process.
Hi.
And I think
You were the
life
perfect
is a
fit.
creative process. Yes. So I'm really thankful to be here.
Well, in the bonus episode, questions I know that I'm dying to ask you have to do with thinking about ourselves as unreliable narrators and how do we undermine our own narrative
Mhm.
sometimes. And I also really want to talk a bit about not just writing out of our own trauma, but right now, the collective trauma, what's happening with injustices in our country.
Yeah.
So people who are paid subscribers are going to have a chance to listen to that bonus episode. Uh, if you are not yet a paid subscriber, Christy's going to tell you just how to become one.
Yeah, just go to emergingform.substack.com, and for just a few dollars a month, you can support the show and keep us going. Thanks so much for your support, by the way. And Gigi, thanks for talking with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Gigi.
If you like our show, visit us at emergingform.substack.com, where you can find more, including show notes and back episodes.
There, you can also sign up for our bi-weekly newsletter or become a paid subscriber, which gets you bonus episodes every other week.
That's emergingform.substack.com.
You've been listening to Emerging Form. This is Rosemary Watola-Tromer, and my co-host is science writer Christy Ashwanden. Our fabulous audio producer is Cherie Turner, and our music is created and performed by Kira Kopostansky and edited by Leah Shaw. Kate LaRue designed our logo, and Jack Mueller, of course, inspired our work and the name of this podcast. As he always said, you must obey the poem's emerging form. Until next time.